People who cater to the super rich. What things have you seen? I'm a driving instructor and one group rented the track to drive their supercars for the day. At the end of the day they all partnered up and got into the cars to leave. After they were gone we realized that they had forgotten their Lamborghini Aventador at the track. That was the tip. I used to pet sit. I remember a rich person asking me to pet sit their cat. There was a lot of TVs in almost every room. The weirdest was the bathroom. Sorry, cat bathroom. There was a TV playing cat cartoons, an overly fancy litter box and paintings of cats. Some extremely wealthy people I have been around have more acute sense of their own time and mortality, leading to impatience. Like they understand how awesome their lives are and therefore how short they feel. I knew a guy whose vintage yacht broke down before summer so he bought another one strictly for that upcoming summer. His reasoning was he likely had 20 full health summers left in his life and didn't want to spend one of them without a boat considering he had the means to. Honestly can't argue with that logic. Old high school teacher of mine is an extremely successful private tutor and does a lot of work in the wealthy neighborhoods in the area. He told us once he was tutoring a kid and helped him get prepared and pass his college level physics class, and at the end of their last session the kid told him to wait there and went into his dad's office and came out with his payment and an extra $1,000. My teacher tried to deny it, saying it was too much, but the kid said his dad asked him to give a tip. I used to work for an Arab billionaire's son, a dad is money guy, terrible garbage human being. Once saw him spend $16,000 on a wallet, was a fancy one with little gold spikes on it and stuff. He had shoes with gold on them. I remember one year for his birthday he received like 30 plus cakes, big fancy cakes, and he told us to leave them on the floor in the hallway outside his room. We walked by those cakes every day for 2 weeks waiting for instruction. After the 2 weeks we were told to throw them away. My college roommate was from a pretty wealthy family in Thailand, but his friend was from the 8th richest family in Thailand. One day I was sitting on the couch exhausted after working a 14-hour shift when they came in giggling about how the guy just bought a $9,000 jacket. I'll never forget that feeling. That was pretty much exactly how much money I was killing myself to make to pay my tuition that semester. I became personal friends with my boss and his wife. Super nice people. The wife turned out to be an heiress and would buy me whatever I mentioned, like in passing during a conversation. I learned gifts were how she was raised to show love. I've trained myself to only talk about things I already own, unless I find something useful she might like and suggest it for her. A woman who owned a small private jet business told me one time someone paid them to fly their dog, by itself, to NY for about $45,000 for some training. No other passengers. I've had co-workers, in Aviation, fly across the country for a lobster roll and coffee beans. The trip there and back probably cost $60k minimum. Unreal. Private aviation is unreal. Let's say you fly from New York to South Florida. About 3 hours, give or take a bit. That's 6 hours round trip. Private jets can range from a few thousand an hour to 15k plus. Our company has larger planes, so let's say 8k HR. Round trip travel is $48,000. Just airfare. That is more than a lot of people make in a year, and these folks are spending that on airfare. Private aviation has gone gangbusters since Trump's tax cuts. Good to know it helps some people. Have been working for the super rich for some time. Craziest thing I've seen: brand new 90-meter multi-million pound GBP yacht was built in Netherlands. Maiden voyage to Antibes, France. Owner came on board and left after a few hours. Next week we get sent to Genoa, Italy, where all the bathrooms and boat were ripped out and upgraded. That doesn't sound like a big deal, but I'm talking about brand new marble sinks, showers, floors and lobbies all crowbarred out, chucked in skips. Tons of brand new polished marble bent. New marble colors and patterns arrived in the weeks following. There's feed me money, there's duck you money, and there's it's not even a thought money. My wife's aunt and uncle were busy the entire day of their 25th anniversary and returned home at about 2100 hours. Decided that the kids needed a bit of fun and booked a private jet to Moscow. They live in Paris and spent a week there. Money, gotta love it. Some kids have whole plans and strategies they practice to prevent being kidnapped or harmed by crazy stalkers. One kid I worked with was the kid of a big Hollywood player. And people would stalk the kid in an attempt to get to the parent. So this nut job wielding a screenplay broke in and cornered the kid. Here I am thinking I am going to have to throw myself physically between them, but the kid dove into a nearby dog kennel and locked themselves in. He couldn't get out, but the nut job couldn't get in either. So the nut job just threw the screenplay at him into the kennel. Meanwhile I had called the cops. I was so impressed by the kid's quick thinking and asked how he got the idea. But he said that he always keeps an eye out for a way to escape. And when he sees someone he doesn't know approach, he gets ready to run. I felt awful that this kid had to live like that. If I hadn't seen it happen myself I would have thought it was just paranoia. I worked at a resort and marina that dealt with high-end boats, from mega yachts to brand new cigarette boats. Always assumed the quiet dude with the stained shirt as the owner of the performance boat. Never expect tips from mega yachts. The most narcissistic guests were always surgeons. The angriest guests were lawyers. No offense to attorneys, I am one. The richest were in construction and commercial real estate. The best tippers were guys entertaining their side pieces on their boats when you know their actual wives. I used to work for a company that modified aircraft for really rich people. I'm talking 747s, not Gulfstreams. This company had made several aircraft for this one customer, who I was told had purchased a new one solely because his spiritual advisor had told him that one of his current planes was bad luck. He still let his wife use it for her personal travel. To me, one of the most exquisite features of these planes wasn't the gold-plated everything, or airwood veneers, it was the silk carpet. That stuff cost over $1,000 per square foot and feels like walking on a bed of angel feathers harvested in the most inhumane way possible. Granted, these guys don't deck out the whole plane, just their personal areas. The aft third is usually reserved for staff and such and is more like a fancy economy class, but yeah, silk carpet. A friend did some work on Sylvester Stallone's home. Apparently there's a ton of statues and art of himself, some of which are naked and very well endowed. I worked for the sister of a billionaire doing odd jobs that eventually turned into doing the same for her friends and family. People in the single-digit millions spend recklessly, always trying to show off their wealth. People in the double-digit millions are a mixed bag. People in the $100 million dollar sign B range were incredibly interesting because the ones I worked for were incredibly frugal. If you took away the business aspect, they were normal people, not pretentious assholes. They didn't really care about appearances anymore. They drank $50 bottles of liquor, not $1,000 scotches. They preferred pizza to a catered meal. They bought the home with the best view, not the biggest home. Their big purchases were also investments. Own a PGA course, but use a $2,000 set of clubs because they liked the fit. Make a $50 million deal in khaki shorts, sandals, and a t-shirt. Never did I hear a raised voice. Every request was prefaced with please, and often thanked genuinely. I was incredibly shocked, not the demeanor I anticipated. That leads me to the most common thing I saw: terrible kids. Just absolute abominations of people. Terrible, demanding, and not worthy of the empires their parents built. My grandpa was a piano tuner. He couldn't drive due to epilepsy, so family would take him to jobs. One day dad took him to a job and got talking to the owner. He said the guy lived in the biggest, nicest mansion he had ever seen. Everything in the house was crazy expensive. But the owner and his wife were very down to earth and normal, if not a bit rough around the edges. Finally his curiosity got the better of him and dad asked how they made their money. The guy said he used to drive a truck and got tired of needing to carry around bottles of ketchup. That's how my dad met the creator of the ketchup packet. My dad delivered a pizza to Rob Didek. He tipped him $100 and apparently farted and thought it would be silent, but it wasn't. That was hush money and you ducked it up. Family friends were having marital issues. Their marriage counselor figured out a lot of their problems were overcooking meals. The counselor reminded them that they are rich and can just cater all their meals, and it would be cheaper than getting a divorce. They listened to the counselor and now are happily married again. I had a client that lived right outside Nick. They were new money in an area that was mostly old money. Hated their neighbors, but played nice face to face. Every time the neighbor's wife would buy something and try to show it off, they would buy a more expensive rare version, or buy two of the same if that wasn't possible. The vast majority of it was displayed in the front room. Client's wife called it the duck-off room. They were a bit eclectic but were really nice people. A cousin works at, let's just say, a higher-end, worldwide known hotel chain, and he works at one in a larger city. Couple years back, a random guy came up to him and asked him for a dinner suggestion and says price isn't a concern. My cousin keeps up with what's trendy in the city, knows some owners and such, and gave the guy a suggestion. Next day the guy asked for him by name, gave him $100 and said dinner was amazing. Now where should we eat tonight? Another suggestion, and the next day, another $100. Only this time, his manager saw this goes down and then a few minutes later, do you know who that is? Nope. I won't say the name, but let's just say old money and probably in the $100s of millions net worth. Cool story, huh? Well, a couple months later my cousin went to work one day and was told this person would be calling at 6 p.m. and only wanted to speak to my cousin. The conversation was short. Basically we're in town next month for 4 nights. Book the 6 of us for wonderful dinners. We trust your opinion. He was given an email for basically their family assistant, and to let that person know the plans. The family arrived, said hi to him as they checked in, and said they were looking forward to their dinners, and 4 days later upon checking out handed him $1,000 for his wonderful local knowledge, or something like that. My cousin was a caretaker for one of those Beverly Hills rich ladies. While she was alive my cousin didn't know how to cook. So she flew a chef from Paris first class and have him set up in a hotel. All the chef did was come to her place every day and teach my cousin to cook. While they were watching TV my cousin remarked that the newest Benz on the commercial was nice. When he came to work the next day she bought it for him, top of the line with all the bells and whistles. Ever since that day my cousin had to be careful on what he says. They returned the car. They have a tennis court at her place. He watched Nadal play there I believe. Kardashian's dogs sometimes go to their yard. My cousin have a daughter. Dog that has a trust and can go any school from elementary to university fully paid. Sadly the old lady died couple of years ago. Left them about 20 mil USD. I think they are still fighting the grandkids at court because of it. That 20 mil was in the will and everything with a no contest clause I think. I used to work in business aviation. Someone wrote poor people suck on a small spot on the tail of a private jet. Probably the most tasteless. I also had a lady come in on a charter and having a panic about how she couldn't remember where she left her Range Rover. It was hours after closing and she literally had no info about where it should be. I had to deduce that she had probably departed from the other side of the airport and found her car for her. They never tipped and were regular late night call-ins. Rich broker I worked with got a divorce. His wife wanted $30K a month, per child, in child support. His lawyer convinced him it was a good deal and he should take it. He asked me if $30K a month was a lot of money. I told him that was more than I make in an entire year. He said, "Duck, can't believe I have such a shitty lawyer." Cool dude. Had to overnight him some pants because somehow he ended up in Scotland and it was cold and he couldn't be bothered to go shopping. He had a house in Santa Barbara that was given to his first ex-wife that stopped paying taxes on it, basically an abandoned mansion. He sent his assistant there to check it out and there was a family of raccoons living in it. He really liked Grey's Anatomy and needed ice for his Diet Coke. Like really needed ice, so the office got a $1,000 ice machine just on the off chance he showed up to the office. I dated a woman who did interior design for a middle-tier Silicon Valley developer. Middle meaning spec homes in the $2 million range, which was a nice house 19 years ago. Of course now $2 million gets you a hovel with a nice paint job. Anyway. The ultimate stove to have was a La Cornu. Those are the ones at Williams Sonoma stores with lots of brass and enamel. They were $20K and had a multi-year wait. So she figured out that she could go to France and get them in like 6 weeks for $10K plus shipping. So that was most of her design gig, vacationing in France and buying stoves. I have worked for some of the richest people in Maryland, and the one thing that stands out more than others is this doctor I worked for in Montgomery County. It's one of the most affluent zip codes in America. Anyway, this guy owned a shitload of offices around the DC area, tons of employees and associate doctors, etc. Guy was seriously loaded. Huge garage full of super expensive cars like multiple Ferraris, art collection, wine cellar, the works. I used to do it work for his medical practice and manage all the servers and stuff, and occasionally went to their house because I was the lead admin. I once was working in his house and was walking around upstairs where the bedrooms were. I shit you not, this guy was laying in bed being fed by an assistant. Like he was literally laying in bed while someone hand fed him, and not like grapes but a regular meal. It was ducking weird as shit. Imagine someone feeding you a full meal like a steak and spoons of soup, salad, etc. And you never used your hands. It was like an adult being fed like a baby. It seemed like Saddam Hussein type shit. I've never seen anything like that before, and that was what popped into my mind. Like a dictator or something who demands to be treated like a literal king. There was nothing sexual about it. Keep in mind this was a man in his 50s who was in fine physical shape and didn't need a caregiver. It was just pure opulence. Then one time I was working in the kitchen area and his young son, probably late teens early 20s, came walking past me and stunk to high heaven a pot, which I'm totally cool with and we joked about. He went to the kitchen and poured a IPA into a glass and went back to his room. This was at 9 AM. Lol, I thought it was hysterical. He was a cool kid from my interactions with him. Probably just figured my dad is rich as shit so I don't have to worry about anything, so he was totally laid back. I've got some other strange things, but that is by far the strangest. Edited for additional content. Worked at a restaurant where a few of the regulars were the children of billionaires. I told my parents that my tuition costs $500,000 a student, from China, in America. I overheard after being asked how she has so much money. Another time I was serving a table, I was asked to bring a tray of 60 patron shots, $600, for a 19-year-old student. I must have had an incredulous look on my face because his only response to assuage my concern was, my father owns diamond mines in Africa. I went to a New England prep school for high school on a full-ride sports scholarship. There were a decent amount of foreign national students, mainly from Asia, that came from extremely wealthy families. One of those students' parents bought him a brand new BMW 5 Series fully loaded when he got his license our junior year. When we graduated a year later, he was going back to Korea and obviously couldn't take the car, so he gave it to his best friend. Kid got an $80K car at 17 years old, just for being good friends with the right guy. I'll never forget that. Was a boyfriend of a girl from an obscenely rich family. The sister used to have the nanny, who was sleeping with the husband, but that's another story. Fly to Paris in their G550 to buy the newest Hermes bag so she could show it off a few days before it went on sale in the US. I tutored a wealthy 5-year-old. I got paid good money to spend an hour drawing and coloring and playing with this kindergartner, but all in French. He had been to more places in the world by 5 than I'll ever go to in my whole lifetime probably. The best part of the job were the perks, though. They would take me and my so out to dinner at fancy restaurants and pay the bill no matter what it was. They would invite us over to eat some delicacy they prepared. Wife was Chinese Vietnamese, husband was Indian, and they'd always have some house guest staying with some crazy resume. For example, one time they had a diplomat for the Netherlands there to do business. They had houses in my city and in San Francisco and would fly there all the time. They invited me on several occasions, but I never had time to go. I also befriended and stayed with the daughter of Russian oligarchs who lived in Paris. The mom was a famous writer and the dad did something in business. Their grandfather was a famous Soviet writer, and so in general they lived a very cultured life. They lived in the richest part of Paris called Neuilly-sur-Seine and had houses in the Alps, Crimea and Moscow. The crazy part, or rather sad part, was that she only had a few options for a career. She could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a businesswoman. Their son was lucky enough to study at the Geneva Conservatory, but that was only because he was really talented. In this family, if you didn't have a natural artistic talent, you only had those 3 career prospects to choose from. I had the impression that she was rather depressed about how limited her options were and how much pressure was put on her to succeed. I've worked with some fairly wealthy people in the developing world. More or less new money, people who have been successful with some business venture or other. Overall, they are a bit out of touch with the realities of the world. I used to think that they were a bit naive too, because I saw a lot of other people taking advantage of them, outright robbing them. Over time, I realized while that's not untrue, it's more complicated. They did fail to notice a lot of uncollegiate activity on the part of the people they hired, but not all of it. What they did notice, they wrote off as the cost of finding people they could trust with projects that were actually important to them, and work with for years. So yeah, you could overbill them for a few $1,000 once or twice, but if you worked hard and produced results instead, you could bootstrap your whole business to the next level with just them as a client. Eventually, I realized they valued trust a lot more than they valued money. They made their money with fairly long-term, high-risk, high-reward ventures running in parallel. For example, research. So it all makes a little more sense now. I know plenty of rich useless people too, but not very well. A lot of wealth is simply inherited in Asia. Cash flow is a really difficult thing here. Some people think they are important because they are born rich and act like fools. They do some pretty wild stuff, but I don't stick around to hear about it. My dad works in shipping and has a lot of friends who have worked on super yachts. In the 90s, one of his mates got a call up to bring the yacht of a particular Australian media tycoon billionaire, not that one, from Sydney to New York, with instructions to be anchored in a particular bay at an exact time with the lunch spread for 50 people ready. So they got there and set up the food. The guy never showed up. Turns out he was having a rich dude party in a building overlooking the harbor and wanted to be able to point down and say, "That's my boat." He wanted the lunch just in case he decided to take his rich friends down to his yacht, but he didn't feel like it that day, so all the food got wasted and they sailed back to Oz without seeing him. A friend from high school worked a few years as a deckhand on yachts in the Mediterranean, and he said he once jumped in to get a customer's bag and got tipped €4,000. He also observed actual bricks of coke brought onto P. Diddy's yacht. I am an art student working as a gardener. We work in one of the wealthiest areas in my country. Some customers are really eager to show me their collection of artworks that they have hanging on their walls once they find out that I study it. I remember one time standing in a bathroom with my dirty gardening clothes and there was a Picasso above the toilet. Nothing too fancy, but I used to help build multi-million-dollar homes about a decade ago. One couple, neurosurgeon and dentist, had an office with one of those bookcase doors leading under the stairs. They stored their surround sound equipment and a safe in there. Another house had a very micromanager-esque woman as the owner along with her husband. She would regularly come to the site and order the workers around while the foreman sighed and rolled his eyes at her. At one point he had to order her off the site because she was being a safety hazard to his workers. I remember this couple also has a creepy setup for their kids. 2 bunk beds on either side of a wall for the kids, and both rooms led to a bathroom facing the road with a big bay window right next to the tub. So essentially, any person driving or walking past, or any neighbor could just look over and see these kids taking a bath. As a chauffeur and ski companion for a mega rich guy's daughter, he sent me out to buy her a birthday present for when she turned 17, I think it was. This was way back in the 70s, so I got her a new BMW 2002 and told the dealer to charge it to the guy. Which was cool, and later the dealer offered me an absolutely long trade-in that was the usual cream puff only driven to church on Sundays. $500 for a really good late model used car, but an American car they never dealt in. Much later on, 30 years later, I was working with an architect building a home for another mega rich guy, and the library was to be paneled in knotty pine. Guy's wife arrived when it was almost completely trimmed out and says, "Too many knots." So we ripped out the whole interior, and the guy, who owned several sawmills, sent back to the mill to ship another truckload so we could select the boards under the wife's direction. And same wife, same building, could not figure out how to turn the car around in the triple wide driveway, so he had a turntable installed in the garage, so all she had to do was miss the edges of the door on the way in or out. I briefly worked with one of the top Saudi Arabian crown princes in the 80s. He would buy out the top 3 floors of the best hotels, 4 Seasons etc. 2 floors were for maids help security, top floor was for the royal family, once it was only the prince and his 3 wives. Crazy sheet. We used to have to close off the corridors under the hotel to let them enter and exit without being seen. Mainly celebrities, famous people, but also just very wealthy people who didn't want to be seen. Nothing really crazy happened in there, but it always makes me think of who the hell is running around under the hotel I'm staying in, lol. The most memorable night was when a detective came accompanied by 2 older adults. I knew who they were right away. I grew up here in Florida. They stayed for I think 3 nights. And it was paid for by the feds. We took care of Casey Anthony's parents. My niece married to an absurdly rich guy. His quirk: he did absolutely everything possible to hide his fortune. Simple clothes, normal car, decent but not lavish house, self-allowance. Guy literally hates his fellow multi-millionaires in the guts. He told a story when he was really into Formula 1. His dad bought him a karting track. Long story short, the guy got really good and won several small championships, earning a spot in a training camp with some of the current Formula 1 pros. As soon as they realized he came from money, the would-be trainers, other kids and pretty much everyone started treating him differently, basically saying he is not good enough and that he will be paid for to become a F1 pilot. That story repeated itself many times over from Oxford University, where the guy went to learn, earning a scholarship not by simply paying, to pretty much every business deal where people were trying to get way more simply cause he's filthy rich and can afford it. Gold diggers who were ready to satisfy every adult dream of his only to get into the money, etc etc. Instead of becoming a cynical asshole version of Scrooge, he and his family just hid that they have wealth. They wanted normal lives and honest human interactions. I deliver for Uber Eats, so I find myself in rich neighborhoods often. This one gated house sets their driveway up like a magazine at night, with lights on, a fountain and an Escalade on each side of the driveway, parked on an angle with lights on them as well. Yes, 2 Escalades mirroring each other. Maybe they don't do it every night, but I've seen it a few times. My grandfather died with a $20 million portfolio. He lived in a 1-bedroom condo that was built in the 50s, drove a rusted out Honda, and his entire wardrobe came from Walmart and was 10 years old. At his will reading, a bunch of distant relatives showed up hoping to get a piece. In his will, he made fun of all of them, then spent 10 pages detailing how and where he wanted all of his money donated to specific charities and foundations. Some of it was even really surprising, as nobody besides him was aware that he casually owned 160 acres of land in Vermont that was just forest. The land was donated to Land Trust and turned into hiking trails. Hired someone to take his credit card and create for him, and pay for, a whole fake and very expensive trip to Europe so he could go to Mexico with his mistress during that same time. Was in the middle of a divorce and he didn't want any evidence of his affair affecting the proceedings, so he had someone create a whole alibi. Was catering a wedding inside a family's second kitchen in the home. Though this was the lesser kitchen, the entire wall opened up to an infinity pool overlooking the ocean from up on a cliff. As we were prepping, a little girl, the family's youngest daughter it turns out, comes skipping into the room as cute as can be, maybe 6-7 years old. She helps herself to some of the pastries we'd prepared for later, without asking, and then walks up to me and says with wide eyes, "You do cooking for a job?" Thinking she's impressed. I respond proudly, "Yes I do actually, it's a lot of fun." Without hesitating she says fairly plainly, "That sucks," before skipping away. I used to install direct in wealthy areas of an East Coast city in the US. While I try to give customers options on where I install the satellite dish, I have to get a good line of sight for it to work properly, so sometimes the location options were limited. One rich lady's house, gorgeous house right on the beach. I only found 2 good spots for the dish. It could either be on a pole in the middle of her backyard, or on the corner of the roof. She definitely did not want it in the middle of her yard. Only problem was that she had a metal roof and we use specific mounting hardware for that. We happened to be back ordered on that hardware for a few weeks out. When I informed her of this, she got visibly upset that she'd have to wait that long to get her cable up and going. I apologized many times and told her she'd need to reschedule a few weeks later and I leave. 3 days later I'm looking over my work orders for the day and I notice her name and address. I'm like, wow, I bet she thinks she's getting a different installer who she can try to convince to give her a different answer. I was wrong. I pull up to the house, brand new shingle roof. I did the install on the roof. I used to work for a billionaire Russian family as a tutor for their daughter. One day we're in her room studying and suddenly she yells "Dad is home" and runs to the window. She'd heard a helicopter and knew it was about to land on the lawn. Until recently I was working on the bread and pastry team at a very high-end restaurant in LA. Aside from the bread that was served before the meal, we would also have to make burger buns. We didn't have burgers on the menu, but we had to have some buns stocked in the freezer just in case some VIP decides they want a burger instead. Now there was also one particular regular who would order burgers, but only like to eat them as sliders. So of course we also had to make slider buns just in case he came in. God forbid we were to tell a rich person "I'm sorry, we don't have hamburgers here." I had a classmate whose father or mother was filthy rich from family money, can't remember. But they and he were amazing people. In uni this girl in class who was really nice but also came from a poor family dropped her MacBook. She worked 60 hours a week for 3 months in the summer. He just came up, gave her his MacBook, and said he would just get a new one after school and his parents wouldn't care. Pure generosity. There was no TikTok movie or karma whoring going on. He was a stellar dude spending his parents' money but only on stuff for other people and in a nice helpful way. He also gave all the guys in class a suit for graduation. Lots of the people were talking about renting one and stuff and he told everybody he knew a place to rent real nice suits. We all went there and we all rented a suit for €100 or so, everything included, and when you went to return it we found out they were all paid for by this dude. He was like, renting a suit is stupid, but buying a suit is expensive. Now you got best of both worlds. Last thing I heard he bought like 10 PS5 from scalpers and sold them for retail to kids in the neighborhood. Duck, I should have stayed friends with him. Entire basement full of crap that the wife bought. Furniture, clothes, boxes and boxes of sheet. Mostly from Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom and similar specialty stores. Online wasn't as big back then. Husband told me she had million-miler status on American Airlines just from the stuff she put on her credit card. They had separate accounts. Back then credit card purchases counted as if you had flown the miles. I clean houses and I've learned that generally, the more money they have the nastier they are. One couple had 6 bathrooms. I cleaned once a month and every single toilet would be decimated. Dry diarrhea down the sides, on the seats, on the ducking flusher handle. Globs of toothpaste everywhere. They had a huge walk-in closet with a lidless trash can. It was filled to the top with piss-soaked adult diapers. No lid. The whole closet reeked of piss, even their clothing. The kitchen was, let's just say I had to spray everything down with cleaner and let it sit while I cleaned another area, and then I had to use a scraper to get the counters clean. They literally never wiped them down after cooking eating. Appliances and sink weren't any better. Another lady had a fondness for butt plugs. Problem is that she didn't clean them. She'd toss it in the nightstand drawer and buy a new one. I know this because she left the drawer open once. There were a dozen or more very used, very dirty butt plugs in there. Caked and dried sheet. People are ducking gross. I refuse to clean for the wealthy anymore. No amount of money is worth a hazmat situation. An acquaintance of mine was building a house for a married couple who hated each other, but the husband was far too wealthy to get divorced. They had separate elevators installed so they would never worry about ever having to see each other. Not my story, but I met someone who worked as a travel chef for some branch of an Arab royal family not to be named, but if you need a hint, they were the only people in America allowed to fly on 9/11, when all other air traffic in the country was shut down. Anyway, she had some wacky stories, but what stuck with me is the infant that all the servants referred to as the football because that's how she was treated. Nobody interacted with the baby on a human level at all, servants or family. It was just a piece of luggage that had to be regularly tended to so it didn't die. I mean, who's got time for a baby, am I right? Worked graveyards as a valet at an ultra-luxury boutique hotel. It's quite shocking how some of these people live and you'd never have a clue by just looking at them on the street. One weekday night I was asked at 2 AM by a guest to bring around his Bentley. Regular looking dude came out with a backpack, got in and left. Not 30 minutes later the same dude pulls up in a Ferrari and now has a briefcase instead of backpack. Skip ahead an hour and the same guy orders 5 shot glasses to his room. I go up and it's 2 guys in robes and 2 naked ladies on the couch. They have lines of coke and booze on the coffee table. They tip me $50 for the shot glasses and I leave. 2 hours later, just as the sun was rising, the 2 guys come out together in suits looking like they were heading to the office. The ladies left shortly after. Obviously Drew Gus and escorts were nothing new, but the car swap middle of the night was a bit strange. While I didn't cater specifically to the rich, I did fix appliances in their homes. Aside from having a bunch of washers dryers, they all, and I mean all, had hallways of pictures and paintings of the children. Sometimes an entire wing of the house dedicated to pictures of the children. I found it weird. Was catering a wedding for a very wealthy Nigerian businessman's daughter who was living in the US now. She was marrying a white American whose family looked like that stereotypical Midwest family. The dance floor opens up and it's time for the father-daughter dance, and it turns into the bride dancing fairly suggestively as the dad started throwing cash around, probably like $10k in total, as the Nigerian guests started to collect the fallen money. I don't judge, but it was the funniest shit I ever watched. Imagine all of the Nigerian guests who had been flown in are going wild and this Midwest extended family just standing there with a look that can only be described as, what the duck are we even watching? All the catering staff had been warned about this part of the ceremony by the event planner. She claimed this was customary in Nigerian West African culture, though having been to West Africa and having even been to a wedding there I never heard of this custom, but clearly the in-laws hadn't been told about it. It was just a surreal experience. Also, having worked a lot of high-end weddings, you learn just how unique each family's specific traditions really are. For example, on my mother's side, whenever the bride and groom kiss you are expected to hit your glass with your knife, fork, spoon. Never seen that in any other wedding. Fine dining server, Bill Gates adding a side of broccoli to his meal, Melinda telling him he didn't need it, and Bill slumping in resignation. This was several years before they were divorced, and it's the first thing that came to mind when they separated. IDK about catering, but I sat in the same room as my friend while she FaceTimed with one of the richest men in the world, son. I don't wanna specify who for privacy reasons. They are good friends at uni together, and she joked that she'd only deliver him a pizza to his home across the country. She's a delivery driver, if he tipped her. He said, I'll give you a tip so big you'll never work again. We googled his net worth that night and Google said it was $24 million. But I'm honestly convinced it's gotta be at least 3 or 4 times more given who his dad is. Legit one of the richest men on earth. It's just kinda about appalling to me given that the 3 of us are the same age, but my friend and I work as delivery drivers while he is a multi-billionaire. Edit, millionaire dart. I guess the reality of it feels weird when he was like best friends with your friend, but he represents literally the opposite end of the American caste system. Not super rich, but a very well off, maybe upper middle class bordering super rich family. I worked under the table for them. I did whatever they wanted me to do. Cleaned the floors or chicken coop, cooked dinner, picked kids up from school, walked and brushed dogs, did laundry and dishes, etc. One day I was helping them with a party. Cooking, cleaning, serving, passing out blankets, etc. Twice the mom made a joke to her guests that I was the help. They were lovely people, but that kind of felt shitty. My dad is a prominent and well-respected millwright in my area, and thus is acquainted with tons of CEOs and gold mine owners with duck money. One of his pals is an older gentleman who recently retired from his position as an investor in the mine with a net worth of about $10 million or so. If you didn't know who he was, he'd just seem like your average 50-something. He wears khakis and polos, and he lives in a nice house with a go-kart track. He's a genuinely nice, normal guy. I worked at a ridiculously upscale boutique retailer. We had a few billionaires who would book the store to shop privately. I offered one of them water or tea. No response. Repeated it louder, thinking she couldn't hear me because she was elderly. And her husband said, "Oh, she doesn't speak to the help." Years later, when I was managing it, we had great conversations. Always kind of respected the conviction. When I was younger, I worked for a chain restaurant and moved to Florida to open a new store. Found out that a few of the new hires were insanely rich kids that got the job for fun and to meet people. It was kinda crazy. One of them gave me a set of NHL playoff tickets to the Flyers vs Panthers that he had bought thinking they would be playing the Rangers. Him and his girlfriend lived in my apartment complex and would routinely buy me shit-like groceries and stuff because they hung out in my place a lot playing PlayStation. Another one was a girl I dated that was Wayne Heisinger's niece. She'd literally babysit for Dan Marino. Same deal. She'd buy me all kinds of groceries and come over to cook for me all the time. It was weird but very cool. They are super racist and don't realize it. They see racism as rednecks lynching a black guy, hiring a bunch of undocumented housekeepers and paying them minimum wage with the threat of deportation if they piss their boss off doesn't even register. They see it as an act of charity that they would take these poor, uneducated savages away from the fields and into their nice and air-conditioned Encino or Beverly Hills homes. They also drink so much. These people are all barely functioning alcoholics. They basically drink for almost any occasion. Christmas? Drink. New Year's? Drink. Baby shower? Drink. Tuesday? Drink. St. Patrick's Day? Borderline alcohol poisoning. If they like you, they expect you to drink too. They don't give a shit about your excuses. You best drink what they give you because you're at their mercy. I used to deliver food for a well-known app and I once delivered to the richest area in my city. We are talking private gated neighborhood with city block sized mansions. I pulled up and an old man in a suit came to the window and a girl around 20 opened the door in what I can only describe as a Miss Muffet outfit with a puffy dress and weird bonnet. She talked like she was never outside before, very strange and childlike. The whole time this old man is just watching us from the window. She said thank you and sat there for a second almost as if she wanted to tell me something. The old man made a gesture and she ran back in. It was the single strangest experience of my life. Edit, spelling. My dad used to work for a private airfield. They had a ton of people flying but most of the more richer clients always flew in at night. I remember one time in high school, I had to do a job shadow thing and went to work with my dad. They had the owner of a California airport flying for the weekend. My job was to stand outside with an umbrella. So I stood outside with the umbrella. His wife tipped me $20 and said the sandwich trays are real silver, have at it kid. After they got in their car, I asked my dad what she meant. Apparently, when some richer folks fly, they let the people who detail their planes have the platters and other serving items. I always wondered how we got so many weird serving trays. Another time when I visited him at work I got to hold an albino kangaroo. Most adorable and softest animal I've ever touched. I'm a nanny to rich folks, by my country's standards, and I see waste like you wouldn't believe, getting packages daily, eating out, presents for the kids every week, food deliveries, friends in the guest suite every month. The worst I've seen is their disciplining, because they'll use the threat of me leaving quitting to incite better behavior. At the end of the day the children love me but I'm just replaceable staff. Russian guy I sometimes work for bought a nice house in a pretty nice area of the French Riviera, Mountains. He didn't even visit it before buying and just judged he liked it on pictures. He paid 11 million euros for it. But when he arrived, though the view wasn't perfect because of another house that was on the way to him, to me honestly it was barely there and didn't even mask the sea. So he sent his lawyer there to make an offer to the owners, 4 million euros. But they declined, so he doubled the offer, and they declined again, so he doubled again, and this time they accepted to sell. He had that house destroyed the very day he got the keys, and had an underground parking lot built instead, for the cars he won't be using much here. So basically the guy paid that distant house more than the one he's planning to spend his summers in, just to have it disappear because it kinda annoyed him. And when he told me the story, he was laughing the whole time. Owner of company rented 2 yachts and owned one personally for company outing. Every yacht had staff to serve food and alcohol unlimited. One of the yacht had 5 bedrooms and few jacuzzis. My high school friend's parents were low rich, like a few mil. He had a swimming pool on Long Island suspended in the deck over the ocean. Then, they had a boat slip with a boat, so you could jump out of the pool and dive into the ocean. They had a state-of-the-art projection screen TV that was 10 feet tall. This was 1986, and they had super expensive art that didn't match. Imagine like a $500,000 painting of a clown, next to a $300,000 sculpture of a dog. It was just off. Still, I really liked his parents. I saw them oddly enough in the restaurant I was working at 2 cities away. Don't exactly cater for this man. Well, wasn't supposed to at least. Harry Trigwerboff, owner of Meriton Suites, and Australia's second richest person, screamed at me for a few minutes once. I was working in one of the hotels he owns, the primary one in the CBD of Sydney. I was temperature testing at the front door all staff who were working there, given the pandemic. He pulls out the front in a Bentley, and his driver comes outside and opens the door for him. At the time I had no clue who he was. Without a second of hesitation, the instant he walked through the door he started screaming, "Where the FCK is my son? Where's he gone? Have you seen him? Have you?" Now my role involved not letting anyone into the building unless they have been screened, but he literally just stormed past screaming at everyone on his way upstairs. Maybe 15 minutes later he came down with his son. They were having a very casual conversation and just appearing to not acknowledge the absolute chaos he had caused minutes before. He got into the Bentley with his son, then drive off. Very confusing seeing an 80-year-old billionaire who's so above it all that he can scream at multiple staff, most of whom are his own Meriton staff, notoriously underpaid, then leave without an inch of remorse. As whole. This didn't happen to me but to a colleague of mine, so take it with a grain of salt, I guess, who used to be a bouncer at this club that were the place for rich kids to hang out at. Now he saw a lot of the typical "look at me, I'm so rich" bullshittery, like buying the most expensive champagne in the club and telling the bartender to pour it down the drain, wearing several Rolex watches and hand them out like candy to strangers, or tipping the staff thousands of dollars. Occasionally after telling them to do something embarrassing like barking like a dog or balking like a chicken. But the thing that stuck with him the most was just how far removed these kids were from reality. Case in point. One night he had door duty and didn't let a kid, who was clearly under the influence of something other than mere alcohol, into the club. So what did the kid do? He decided that it was a good idea to take a swing at him. Turns out that it wasn't a good idea, something he quickly found out after he was lying face down on the ground handcuffed with his hands behind his back. But even now the kid didn't seem to be too worried. He just kept saying, "It's alright. Just call my dad, he'll sort this out," over and over again, and seem incapable of realizing that he was actually getting arrested for attempted assault. Not even when the police finally arrived and put him in the back of their car did he seem to fully grasp the fact that he was actually in trouble and that his dad wouldn't show up, wave a wand and make this all go away. Dart. Ducking rich kids, man. My dad works as a marine pilot, usually moving cruise ships or freighters. but occasionally a super yacht will come through. Well, one time a Russian billionaire came through who collects super yachts. I believe he had somewhere in the ballpark of 5-8 of the largest yachts in the world. My dad said that for dinner, they would just casually grab bottles of wine in the $1,000 plus range, and the yacht also had 2 helicopters, one for the kids.